Standing before the hushed assembly, Claire Donovan felt the cold weight of the brass hole puncher still heavy in her pocket. But it couldn't protect her from the paper in the principal's hand. Based on this psychiatric evaluation, the board chair announced, her voice echoing off the library's vaulted ceiling, we are moving for immediate professional decertification. Claire looked down at the forged report, the ink still fresh, signed by a doctor she had never met. Beside her, the very socialites who had smiled at her for years now pulled their chairs away as if she were a leper, their faces twisted with a sickening mixture of pity and disgust. The silence was broken only by the low hum of the projector and a sharp, triumphant whisper from the front row. "It's over, Claire," Evelyn mouthed, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Claire's car was a wreck in the parking lot. Her reputation was a smear on the floor, and her own husband's signature was on the documents that had just bankrupted her. As the security guard stepped forward to escort the madwoman from the building, Claire realized the trap wasn't just set. It had already snapped shut. She had the evidence of a multi-million-dollar fraud in her trembling hand, but in a room full of people convinced she had lost her mind. Who would believe a single word she said? The bleach fumes stung Claire's nostrils as she scrubbed at the jagged letters. "Freak show," carved into the counselor's door. The sponge rasped against the wood, fibers fraying under her knuckles. Behind her, the flyers teetered in the crook of her elbow, their edges curling from the damp air. One slipped, fluttering to the linoleum like a wounded bird. She didn't bother picking it up. The hallway smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of trapped insects. Somewhere down the corridor, a locker slammed. Laughter followed, sharp and unkind. Claire exhaled through her teeth, pressing harder. The letters blurred under the bleach, but the wood grain remained, a map of old scars. The Horizon Initiative was her life's work, a seminar designed to bridge the widening gap between the elite student body and the reality of the world outside these ivy-covered walls. But today, it felt like a target painted on her back. Every stroke of the sponge felt like an act of defiance against a ghost. The vandalism had started small, torn posters, a missing stapler, but it had escalated into this, crude, personal, and relentless. She stood up, her knees popping in the silence of the corridor, and adjusted the heavy stack of flyers. Her auburn hair, usually a fortress of a bun, was already shedding strands that tickled her neck. She felt the weight of the school's history pressing down on her, the portraits of stern alumni watching her struggle with a mixture of boredom and disdain. She wasn't one of them, and the school seemed determined to remind her of that fact every single hour. The silence of the hallway was broken by the sharp chirp of her phone. Claire didn't need to check it to know what was happening, but the habit of professional masochism was hard to break. She set the flyers on a nearby trophy case and pulled the device from her pocket. The screen glared at her with 3 new emails, all from the office of guest speakers she had spent months courting. Her thumb hovered over the first one. Dr. Eris Thorne, a leading voice in juvenile restorative justice. Dear Mrs. Donovan, we received your notification regarding the cancellation of the seminar due to budgetary restructuring. While we are disappointed, we understand the volatility of private school funding. Claire's heart didn't just sink. It turned into a lead weight in her chest. She scrolled to the next. Same phrasing. Budgetary restructuring. The third speaker, a local magistrate, had received a similar message. She hadn't sent those emails. She hadn't even looked at the guest portal since Friday. Someone had bypassed her password, accessed the Horizon Initiative's secure database, and systematically dismantled the roster of speakers that formed the backbone of the entire event. This wasn't just a student with a spray can anymore. This was a digital execution. The panic began as a cold prickle at the base of her spine, spreading upward until her breath felt shallow. She was being erased in real time. She needed an ally, someone who knew the guts of this building better than the architects who had designed it. Claire gathered her flyers and headed toward the service elevator, bypassing the grand mahogany staircase. She descended into the basement, where the air turned heavy with the scent of motor oil and peppermint. Miller's office was a cramped alcove tucked behind the boiler room, a chaotic sanctuary of dismantled hard drives, tangled Ethernet cables, and a perpetually humming coffee maker. Miller himself was hunched over a circuit board, his shock of white hair illuminated by a desk lamp. "I need you to look at something," Claire said, her voice sounding thin against the thrum of the machinery. She didn't wait for an invite. She laid her phone on his workbench, the screen still displaying the cancellation notices. "Someone sent these from my account. I was locked out of the guest portal 20 minutes ago." Miller didn't look up immediately. He finished a delicate solder, then set the iron aside and wiped his calloused hands on a greasy rag. He picked up the phone, his storm cloud eyes narrowing. "Digital breadcrumbs," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Nobody ever cleans up as well as they think they do. You want me to play bloodhound, Donovan? This is school property. If the IT director catches me sniffing around your private logs, it's my pension on the line. The IT director is probably the one who gave them the override." Claire countered, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please, Miller. Everything I've built is on that drive. If I lose the speakers, the board pulls the funding by Friday. I have nowhere else to go." Miller grunted, a sound of reluctant agreement. He pulled a battered laptop toward him, a machine that looked like it had survived a war zone, and began to type with a speed that belied his rough, weathered fingers. "Sit down," he commanded, gesturing to a stool covered in sawdust. "And stop tapping your foot. It's distracting." The basement felt smaller as the minutes ticked by. Claire watched the screen, a blur of scrolling code and command prompts that meant nothing to her, but everything to her future. Miller's jaw was set, his knuckles cracking occasionally in the silence. "Found it," Miller said suddenly, leaning back. The fluorescent light above them flickered, casting a sickly yellow hue over his face. "You've got a ghost in the machine, but the ghost is local. Someone didn't use a VPN. They logged into the guest portal using a hardwired terminal right here in the building." Claire leaned in, her eyes searching the strings of numbers. "Which terminal? The administrative wing?" "Node 42B, Miller said, pointing to a specific IP address. "That's not the admin wing. It's the PTA lounge. Someone sat down in a room full of floral arrangements and lace doilies and gutted your career." The realization hit Claire like a physical blow. The PTA. It wasn't a disgruntled student or a jealous faculty member. This was an internal hit, orchestrated by the very people who claimed to be the school's biggest supporters. The local nature of the threat turned the school from a workplace into a minefield. Every person she passed in the hallway, every parent who offered a polite smile at the gate, was now a suspect. The circle of trust had shrunk to the size of this damp basement office. "I need to get to the admin wing," Claire said, standing up so quickly the stool scraped harshly against the concrete. If they're using the PTA lounge, they might still be there. Or they left something behind. "Don't be a hero, Donovan," Miller warned. But Claire was already out the door. She moved through the administrative office like a ghost, her scuffed shoes silent on the thick, expensive carpeting. The air here was different, scented with vanilla and the metallic tang of high-end printers. The staff had mostly cleared out for the evening, leaving the desks neat and the monitors dark. In her haste, Claire spotted a laptop bag sitting on the edge of a mahogany desk in the PTA coordinator's nook. It was a sleek, leather case, identical to her own. Without thinking, driven by a cocktail of adrenaline and desperation, she scooped it up, convinced it held the records she needed to cross-reference the login times Miller had provided. She didn't notice the weight difference. She didn't notice the small, gold-embossed initials near the handle. VH. Vanessa Higgins, the PTA budget chair. She only knew she had to get somewhere dark, somewhere quiet to see what was inside. Claire turned into the long, narrow corridor that connected the main building to the science wing. This was the old part of the school, where the shadows were long and the marble floors were uneven. Only every third light fixture was functional, casting jagged pools of light that barely reached the corners. She was halfway down the hall when a floorboard creaked behind her. Not the natural groan of an old building, but the deliberate, heavy thud of a boot. She froze. The silence was absolute, save for the distant, rhythmic drip of a pipe. She turned slowly. At the far end of the hallway, a figure emerged from the gloom. Tall, lanky, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low. A face covered by a tactical mask. "Give me the bag, Claire." The voice was muffled, distorted, but the threat was unmistakable. "Who are you?" Claire asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She gripped the leather handle until her knuckles turned white. "The bag. Now, or this gets messy." The figure stepped into a pool of light, and Claire saw the glint of something metallic in his hand, not a weapon, but a heavy tool. He wasn't here to talk. He lunged. Claire didn't scream. Her boarding school training, that ironclad rule of never showing weakness, took over. She swung the laptop bag, using it as a shield as the assailant reached for her. The struggle was clumsy and desperate. He was stronger, his hands gripping her shoulders, shaking her, trying to pry the bag from her fingers. She felt her bun unravel, her auburn hair falling over her eyes, blinding her. She kicked out, her scuffed shoe connecting with his shin, but he didn't let go. He shoved her against the dark wood paneling, the back of her head hitting a framed photograph of the class of 1954. The glass cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Her hand, searching the wall for leverage, brushed against a heavy object on a nearby desk. A solid brass hole puncher, the kind used for thick dossiers. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. As the attacker leaned in, his breath smelling of cheap tobacco and peppermint, she swung it with everything she had. The brass connected with his temple with a sickening thud. The man cried out, a sharp, high-pitched yelp, and recoiled, clutching his head. Blood, dark and viscous in the dim light, began to seep between his fingers. He stumbled back, his eyes wide behind the mask, darting around like a trapped animal. He didn't come for her again. Instead, he turned and bolted toward the emergency exit, his footsteps echoing like frantic drum beats against the marble. Claire sank to her knees, the hole puncher still gripped in her hand. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She looked down at the floor, expecting to see nothing but shadows. But something caught the sickly green glow of the exit sign. A small golden object. She reached out, her fingers trembling. It was a pin, a distinctive laurel-wreathed P with a small ruby at the center. The PTA Volunteer of the Year pin. Only 5 had been issued this year. She felt a cold wave of nausea. This wasn't just a hired thug. This was someone close. Someone who wore the badge of service while trying to break her ribs in a dark hallway. She retreated back to the basement, her legs feeling like water. Miller was still there, his office now a fortress of flickering screens. She slammed the laptop bag onto his workbench and dropped the pin beside it. "He tried to kill me for this," she rasped, pointing to the bag. Miller looked at the pin, then at the bag, then back to Claire. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew she wasn't. He flipped the bag over and saw the initials. "This isn't yours, Donovan. You grabbed Vanessa Higgins' machine. No wonder he was desperate. This is the ledger for the beautification project." "Open it," Claire commanded. Miller didn't hesitate. He bypassed the BIOS password with a series of keystrokes that felt like a funeral march. The screen flickered to life, revealing a spreadsheet that had nothing to do with school spirit. It was a map of greed. Columns of figures, donations for new playground equipment, library renovations, garden projects, were balanced against payments to companies with names like Crestview Holdings and Apex Logistics. "Look at the payouts," Miller whispered, his voice uncharacteristically soft. $30,000 for landscaping to a company that doesn't exist. $50,000 for structural assessment to a shell firm in Delaware. Claire leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the names. The Horizon Initiative sabotage wasn't about her ego. It was a smokescreen. While she was busy scrubbing graffiti and chasing guest speakers, the PTA was moving hundreds of thousands of dollars through the school's accounts, and at the bottom of the most recent authorization form, the digital signature was unmistakable: Evelyn Carter. The name felt like a curse. Her mother-in-law, the pillar of Chestnut Hill, the woman who spent her Sundays at charity luncheons and her Mondays destroying lives. Claire looked out the small, high window of Miller's office. Parked in the restricted fire lane, gleaming under the streetlights like a predatory shark, was Evelyn's silver Mercedes. The war had moved from the hallways to the hearth. The next morning, the air in the Donovan household was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and unspoken threats. Claire sat at the kitchen island, her movement stiff from the bruises on her shoulders. Evelyn was already there, looking immaculate in a cream-colored pantsuit, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She was humming a light tune while she sliced a grapefruit with surgical precision. "Claire, darling," Evelyn said, not looking up. "I've taken the liberty of organizing a family unity dinner for tomorrow night. 6 o'clock at the club. It's been far too long since we all sat down together without the distractions of your little project." Claire gripped her mug, the heat of the ceramic seeping into her palms. "Tomorrow is the final faculty briefing for the initiative, Evelyn. You know that. I can't be at the club at 6. Evelyn finally looked at her, her eyes as cold as a frozen lake. "Oh, but you must. I've already invited the board members. It would look so unstable if the guest of honor was absent. People are already talking, sweetheart. About the graffiti, about your erratic behavior in the hallways last night." The threat was veiled in honey, but the sting was there. Evelyn knew. She knew about the hallway, she knew about the bag, and she was already weaving the narrative of Claire's mental decline. "I won't be there," Claire said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "We'll see," Evelyn replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. Claire retreated to her home office, needing the solace of her own files. But as she opened the door, she stopped. The room was a disaster. Her filing cabinets had been pried open, her research papers scattered like autumn leaves across the hardwood. The desk was bare. The guest list for the Horizon Initiative, the physical copy with the private contact numbers for the remaining speakers, was gone. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood in the center of the wreckage and felt a strange, cold clarity. Evelyn wasn't just sabotaging the school. She was invading Claire's sanctuary. The invasion was total. She reached for her car keys on the hallway table, needing to get back to Miller, back to the data. They weren't there. She searched her coat pockets, the kitchen counters, the mudroom. Nothing. It was only when she went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water that she saw them. Sitting on the middle shelf of the refrigerator, next to the organic kale, were her keys. Taped to the ring was a small, handwritten note in Evelyn's elegant script. "You really should be more careful, dear. Memory is such a fragile thing." The gaslighting was no longer subtle. It was a siege. Even the dog, a usually placid terrier mix, was caught in the crossfire. He was standing in the doorway of the guest room, his hackles raised, a low, guttural growl vibrating in his chest. He was staring at a specific patch of wallpaper near the ceiling, his ears pricked as if listening to a frequency Claire couldn't hear. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. She looked at the wall. There was nothing there but the floral pattern Evelyn had insisted on when they moved in. But the dog wouldn't move. He barked, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed through the empty house. Claire reached up, her fingers tracing the seam of the wallpaper. She felt a small, hard bump. She didn't peel it back. Not yet. She knew what it was. A lens. A microphone. Evelyn wasn't just watching her at school. She was watching her sleep. Desperate for an official intervention, Claire managed to secure a 5-minute window with the school board that afternoon. She walked into the boardroom, the mahogany table feeling like a barricade. The members sat in high-backed leather chairs, their faces masks of polite boredom. "I have evidence of financial irregularities," Claire began, her voice trembling slightly. "The PTA budget for the beautification project is being used to funnel money into shell companies. I have the ledgers." Mr. Henderson, the board chair, sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Claire, we've heard these rumors. But Evelyn Carter has just pledged a $2 million endowment for the new science wing. Her generosity is the only reason this school is staying afloat. To accuse her of whatever this is, it's not just baseless. It's ungrateful. It's not a rumor. I have the files on a drive. The files you allegedly stole from Vanessa Higgins' bag." Henderson interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "Vanessa has already filed a report. She says you attacked her in the hallway, that you're having some kind of episode." Claire looked around the room. Every face was closed to her. They weren't just blinded by Evelyn's money. They were owned by it. She was shouting into a vacuum. She left the boardroom and headed for the only place where the truth might still be buried in paper: the basement archives. It was a labyrinth of rusted metal shelves and damp cardboard, a place where the school's history went to die. She spent hours digging through crates, her fingers stained with dust and ink, until she found them. The original contracts for the construction work. They were hidden behind a stack of old yearbooks. She pulled them out, her heart racing. The signatures were there, the company names matched the shell firms Miller had identified, but as she turned to leave, the heavy metal door of the archive room slammed shut. The click of the lock was final. "Claire, you in there?" A voice came from the other side. Not Miller. The concerned parent who had been whispering about Claire in the PTA meetings. And behind her, the shadow of the tall, lanky figure from the hallway. "Open the door," Claire commanded, her voice echoing in the small, windowless space. "We can't do that, honey," the woman said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You need rest. You're making such a scene." The smell of smoke began to drift through the vents. Not a fire, but the acrid chemical scent of the furnace being pushed to its limit. The room began to heat up, the air turning thick and stifling. They weren't going to kill her, not yet. But they were going to keep her here until the faculty briefing was over. Until she was officially declared a no-show. Claire looked around the room. No windows. One door. She saw the red canister of a fire extinguisher mounted near the back. She grabbed it, the weight reassuring in her hands. She didn't aim for the lock. She aimed for the small glass pane in the upper half of the door. Whoosh! The white cloud of chemical retardant filled the small space, blinding her. But she didn't stop. She slammed the base of the extinguisher against the glass. It shattered. She reached through, ignoring the jagged edges that sliced into her palm, and turned the handle from the outside. She burst into the hallway, a specter of white dust and blood, just as the attackers were retreating. She didn't chase them. She ran for the exit. The contracts clutched to her chest like a shield. She reached her car, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She sat in the driver's seat and spread the contracts out on the dashboard. She needed to see the names. She needed to know who else was involved. Her eyes stopped on the final page of the library renovation contract. The witness signature. Mark Donovan. The world went silent. Her husband, her partner, the man she shared a bed with. His signature was right there, neat and unassuming, certifying a document that authorized a $60,000 kickback to his own mother. She drove home in a trance, the car feeling like a cage. Mark was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine, looking like the picture of suburban innocence. Claire, my God, what happened to you? You're covered in... Did you sign these, Mark? She asked, dropping the contracts onto the granite island. Her voice was dead, stripped of all emotion. Mark looked at the papers, his face paling. Mom said they were just standard indemnity forms for the school. She said it would help your initiative if the family showed a united front on the board's paperwork. I didn't read the headers, Claire. I wanted to help. You helped her steal, Mark. You helped her sabotage me. You're her witness. You're her accomplice. I didn't know, Mark shouted, his voice cracking. She's my mother, Claire. I thought she was finally trying to be on our side. She doesn't have a side, Mark. She has a throne. Claire turned away from him, her gaze falling on the dog, who was still barking at the guest room wall. She walked to the room, her movements mechanical. She grabbed the edge of the wallpaper and ripped. The floral pattern tore away in a jagged strip, revealing a small, black eye embedded in the drywall. A nanny cam, and next to it, a small transmitter. She looked into the lens, her face a mask of cold fury. She knew Evelyn was watching. She knew the trap was set. But Evelyn had forgotten one thing. Claire was a counselor. She knew how to read people. She knew how to find the crack in the armor. And she was about to shatter the glass. The morning of the PTA vote arrived with a brutal finality. Claire woke to a house that felt like a tomb. She reached for her phone to call Miller, but there was no signal. The landline was dead. She went to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs, and saw Evelyn standing by the window, a pair of heavy gardening shears in her hand. The telephone cord lay on the floor, severed like a dead snake. It's for the best, darling, Evelyn said, her voice as smooth as cream. You need a day of silence, to reflect. Claire didn't argue. She ran for the door, but her car wouldn't start. The tires had been slashed, the rubber gaping like open wounds. She didn't stop. She began to run. She ran through the manicured streets of Chestnut Hill, her lungs burning, her scuffed shoes pounding the pavement. She reached Miller's house 3 miles away, her clothes damp with sweat, her hair a wild tangle of auburn. Miller, the emails, she gasped, collapsing onto his porch. Miller didn't waste time. He handed her a flash drive. I got them. The deleted thread between Evelyn and the principal's son. It's all there. The bribes, the sabotage instructions. But Claire, the police are at the school. They're looking for you. Evelyn filed a missing persons report, claiming you're in a fugue state. Drive me, she commanded. They sped toward the school. But as they turned the final corner, a black SUV lurched from a side street. It rammed Miller's truck, the sound of crumping metal echoing through the quiet neighborhood. The truck spun, sliding into a ditch, the world tilting into a blur of green and gray. Claire crawled out of the wreckage, her vision swimming. She saw the SUV idling at the top of the hill, the driver's face hidden. She didn't wait. She scrambled up the embankment and ran for the school's back entrance. The library was packed. The elite of Chestnut Hill were there, dressed in their finest, sipping bottled water and whispering behind their hands. As Claire burst through the doors, the room went silent. She was a mess, bruised, bleeding, covered in dust and ditch water. "There she is," someone shouted. "She's lost it." A gauntlet of socialites blocked her path, their faces twisted in a mixture of pity and disgust. Claire shoved through them, her elbows sharp, her gaze fixed on the podium where Evelyn stood, looking like a queen. "Claire, dear," Evelyn said into the microphone, her voice amplified and echoing. "Please, we've called the doctors. Just sit down." The school principal stepped forward, his hand gripping Claire's arm with bruising force. "Mrs. Donovan, you need to leave. Now." "I have the evidence," Claire shouted, her voice raw. Evelyn held up a sheaf of papers. "And I have this. A psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Sterling. It says you are a danger to yourself and others, that you've been hallucinating this conspiracy." The crowd gasped. A doctor Claire recognized from the country club stepped forward, nodding solemnly. "It's true. I saw her last week. She was incoherent." Claire felt the world shrinking. The madwoman label was a death sentence in this town. No one would listen to her. The board was already nodding, their faces set in grim lines of necessary action. But then Evelyn leaned in. She thought the microphone was off. She thought the room was her kingdom. She whispered into Claire's ear, her breath cold and foul. "I've already filed for emergency custody, Claire. The children will be in my house by tonight. You'll never see them again." Claire didn't scream. She didn't lash out. She felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the remote trigger Miller had given her, the one linked to the nanny cams in her own home. "You're right, Evelyn," Claire said, her voice steady, projected through the still live microphone. "I have been unstable, because I knew someone was watching me. Someone who was so proud of their work they couldn't help but brag about it in the dark." Claire pressed the button. The giant projector screen behind the podium flickered to life. It wasn't the PTA budget. It was a live stream playback. It showed Evelyn sitting in Claire's guest room, laughing as she tucked a bribe into a young man's pocket. "You've been so useful, Leo," the recorded Evelyn said, her voice booming through the library. "My son is a fool, the board is a collection of puppets, and Claire, well, Claire is just a fly in the ointment. Once the beautification money clears the Apex account, I'll be out of the red and back at the tables in Atlantic City. They'll never know they paid for my gambling debts." The young man in the video turned. He pulled back his hood. It was the principal's son. The silence in the library was deafening. The principal dropped Claire's arm, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The board members looked at each other, then at Evelyn, who was standing frozen, her mouth slightly open. Evelyn snapped. She turned toward the screen, screaming, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You bitch!" You think this changes anything? I own this town. I own every one of you." She began to hurl insults at the board, calling their children mediocre brats and their wives vapid cows. The mask hadn't just slipped. It had shattered. Two police officers, who had been waiting in the back to escort Claire to a psych ward, stepped forward. They didn't go for Claire. They went for Evelyn. "Evelyn Carter, you're under arrest for financial fraud, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit assault." As they led her away, her screams echoing through the grand hall, Claire stood at the podium. She looked at the audience, the humbled parents, the terrified board members. "Now," Claire said, her voice clear and unshakable. "Let's talk about the Horizon Initiative. Let's talk about the truth." The seminar was a success, but the real victory happened later that night, in the quiet of her own kitchen. Claire sat at the table, the bruised skin around her eyes a badge of honor. Mark walked in, looking like a man who had seen the sun go out. "Claire, I don't know what to say." Claire didn't look at him. She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 cards. She laid them on the granite island, side by side. One for a divorce lawyer, one for a marriage counselor. "The choice is yours, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but final. "But the woman who lived in fear of your mother's shadow is gone. I'm not hiding anymore." She walked out of the kitchen and into the night air, the scent of lavender and rain finally washing away the smell of bleach. She was exhausted, she was broken. But for the first time in her life, she was free.